Hank Balch back in studio today with Jeffrey Paquet, our water quality expert here at Beyond Clean. And Jeff, this has been a tremendous series so far, but we ain't done yet. We're talking about alarms and alert levels today in this water quality process. I want to welcome you back into the studio before we jump in here.
Well, thank you very much, Hank.
So for those of you all who don't know Jeffrey, he's the CEO VERDA Water Quality Systems. And again, he's been our water quality expert here for the last couple of years at Beyond Clean. You've probably seen his cartoon face out there quite a lot with all the written content, but this is the first time that we've gotten into the video series component of these expert series. And today, as I alluded to, we're going to talk about alarms and alerts, and in particular, what should alarm us or what should alert us to action here, Jeff. And the first question I have is the level or the trigger in these levels, like what is going to cause us to move into maybe that corrective action phase we're going to talk about in a future episode. But how do we determine what's too far gone?
Well, the good news is by the time we get to here in this part of the discussion, we've already talked about risk assessment. So risk assessment will determine the severity of something being out of specification. And then it's up to you to assess how you're going to deal with that. So something's out of specification, has significant impact on maybe patient health and safety. So that's a red alert. You know, whether it's an actual little light going off in the department or whether we get a test result back and we see that it is a problem. And so we set alert level. And in your water quality management plan, after you've done your risk assessment, you are going to define for that level of alert what actions you're going to take. And so as an example, a common thing to happen is to start to see high bacteria levels in your critical water. And while, we end up putting a lot of our instruments through that magic box, the sterilizer, which fixes everything, there's still reasons for concern there. However, if you're using critical water in rinsing something that's been through high-level disinfection and then basically going to go through no other process other than being rinsed with this critical water, you've now infected this instrument with bacteria that's higher than acceptable, which can have direct impact on patient safety. So that's a concern. You definitely, in that particular instance, do not want to be using your critical water to do that final rinse on those type of instruments. And we'll talk about kind of corrective actions in the next episode of what you might do in that scenario. But that's an instance where there's been an alert. You have some defined guidelines of how and when you're supposed to respond to that alert, and you respond to it, and then you go into a corrective action mode.
Are you seeing, of course, at the date of this recording, these new ST108 guidelines are fairly new to the industry, right? They came out in 2023. Are you seeing any departments out there yet on the sterile processing side take some of this and put it into their own water quality policy? Like, I know we're talking about the process, the working group, the risk assessment, as you said, that's kind of determining these levels. But a lot of times when we hear these kind of quality issues in sterile processing, let's just take like our temperature, humidity within sterile processing, we get the questions like, well, what do you do when the humidity goes out of range, and how long can it go out of range? Well, the response is always, what does your policy say? And then you follow your policy. Is that the next kind of step that we need to be taking as departments? Do we need to put this kind of stuff into our policies?
Right. I think whether you call it a water quality management plan or a policy or how that works in your organization, that fundamentally, yes. And yes, I do see hospitals beginning to put this into their policies about what they're going to do when this happens, and trying to work ST108 through those policies they already have around water and the management of instrument quality.
So a couple episodes ago, you mentioned the phrase continual improvement or
Continuous improvement.
process improvement. Yep. Yes. Yeah. And, when we talk about these alarms or these fallouts, obviously we want to get them fixed, but then they're also telling us something about the system as it's built, especially if we start getting a lot of the similar alarms and alerts. And so how should that function if you were talking, to sterile processing users or maybe facilities, and they start seeing these similar alarms? How many of these do we have to see before we start saying, there may be something more systemic at play here? It's not just, hey, the alarm, let's get it fixed down the levels, and now we're good again.
Well, unfortunately, that's a subjective. I'd like to tell you it's 7, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
It's somewhat subjective, but it brings in the discussion about how important it is to do a frequent review of water quality issues with your multidisciplinary team so you can identify a pattern. And if you are seeing this, it probably means you have ineffective control somewhere. And you need to address that and look for that root cause if you can identify it, or at least implement a control that drops the frequency level, whether you figure out what the problem is or not.
So real briefly, and we'll wrap with this. I know we kind of alluded to system controls in the last episode, but we didn't necessarily define them. Can you give us just a quick definition, because now it's coming into play again on this conversation?
Right. So system control could actually be something physical, like a UV filtration light that kills bacteria. Another one could be more process oriented, which is a behavior like changing your endotoxin filters on a routine schedule, or sanitizing your loop piping on a monthly basis. Those are all examples of controls.
Okay, awesome. Well, we talked about controls, talked about alerts and alarms. We're going to come back. We're going to bring Jeff back on the next episode, talking about corrective actions. Okay, so how we got the lights, got the alarms, we got the reports back. We're seeing problems. Now the question is, what do we do about these problems? So hang with us for the next episode of this Water Quality Expert Series. And we're going to go through corrective actions next time. Then after that, we're going to be talking about how to evaluate your existing system and program, look for that gap analysis, which is going to be different from your risk analysis in some sense. And then we'll close with discussions around quality, IQ, OQ, PQ, as well as maintaining this machine, this process that you've spent all this effort and time building. How do we keep this thing running on all cylinders? So hang with us for the rest of this series. But until we talk to you again next month, keep fighting dirty.